Okay, Mardina. So before I get started, I want to pre-apologize because they're doing some cement work right outside my studio window here, and it could get very, very loud in a second. So excuse me if it does. All right. So good setup, good written rationale here. Nice, good job setting up the assignment. Let's jump right to the compositions. Now, I think you've done a good job. Did you change the composition? It seems like it's really dark up here. Right up through here. It could be the way the JPEG rendered, but it just seems like this area right here is really super dark. The other thing I'm seeing is that it's not the same composition in each of the four. This one seems to be cropped differently. In other words, there's a lot more room over on this side than there is this side. So it's really super important when you're doing your typographic studies to make sure that you're using an identical background on each of the four studies, or however many studies you're going to be doing typographically. And the reason is because you have to make, it's apples to apples, okay? So the relationships between this type and this background are going to be different than the relationships between any other set of type and the background if the background is different. So therefore, you're not really comparing apples to apples. Does that make sense? So you really want to make sure that your backgrounds are identical before you start your type studies. Now, it seems like it's darker right up through here. It just seems like it's really darker. It just seems like there's not as much really detail, or there's not as much noticing of the detail here as there was in the thumbnails. That could be, again, that could be the way the JPEG is rendering them. But my other observation, I think, and more importantly, is that the typographic on 3 of the 4 compositions, the typography on 3 of the 4 compositions seems a little bit forced. And I think that these 3, this one, and this one. Now, this one is all center aligned. That's boring. I'm not saying your decisions are boring. I'm saying that technically in design, we've learned this back in week 1 and week 2 when we were working with our shape exercises. If you have symmetry around typography, there could be many more interesting ways to create negative space than creating symmetrical negative space. And that's what happens when you center align type. The surrounding negative space becomes symmetrical, and we know that symmetry in negative space is not always the most interesting thing. Look how much more interesting this negative space is here, simply because it's not center aligned. Same thing here. Although this is, to a high degree, this is center aligned. The top and the bottom are. We've just got that, which appears to be a little bit forced. What I'm getting at is I think this is your strongest composition right here. I think there's too much going on this area in the background. I just think that we could probably get away with the exact same communicated value without so many layers in this kind of frame right here. So I'm thinking if we reduce that to maybe, this right here, okay? And that's going to do something. It's going to open up the top of the composition to allow embrace your style right up there. And you can center align that. That's fine. So you have embrace your style, grandiose interior designing studio. I think it's going to work out beautifully. Try to lighten it. That's what I was talking about. You probably hear that outside, right? Pretty obnoxious noises right there. They're cutting and going through cement. So anyway, so this area right here, I think if you could probably increase the contrast here so that we have more demarcation between the darks and the lights. Right now, this just really appears to be too dark. We see these little kind of light bulbs here, but that's not enough to indicate just really super dark here. I would lighten up the background to give more definition to those hanging lamps and just kind of lighten up this area all right through here through the background. I think that's going to really define a lot of the formal elements that are happening in the composition. All right, so those would be my recommendations moving forward. But of course, comments, if you have any questions at all, please let me know. Thank you very much.